Welcome to yet another edition of your weekly international current affairs program, GLOBEWATCH, from the Cameroon Radio Television with me, Charles Ebune. The Trade Finance Bank for Africa, that is how the Africa Export-Import Bank defines itself since creation in 1993 to serve African economies and to ensure that the continent is more economically integrated, especially at the trade level. So what have they been doing, especially in the fight against COVID-19, which of course has redefined the global economic outlook, including for the African economies? My guest today on GLOBEWATCH is the president of the Africa Export-Import Bank, Professor Benedict ORAMAH. Thank you very much indeed for being my guest on GLOBEWATCH once more.
Well, thank you very much, Charles, for having me today.
Over the years, the bank, the Pan-African institution, has had a policy of expansion. You had 4 regional offices. You are adding another one, the 5th one, which will be in Yaoundé, Cameroon, to cover the Central African sub-region. What is the essence of this new branch?
No, thank you. You see, for AFREXIMBANK, even right from inception, the idea and understanding of the founding fathers was that the continent was diverse. So they wanted the African Export-Import Bank to be organized in such a way that it takes account of the diversity, so that it is global in what it does, but acts local. And the journey to this vision is through the regional offices we are opening. And that's why we've opened the regional office for the Anglophone West Africa in Abuja. The regional office for the Francophone West Africa is in Abidjan. The regional office for East Africa based in Kampala. The regional office for Southern Africa in Harare. We had an office for the Maghreb region in Tunis. During the crisis in Tunisia, the operation was suspended, but we are beginning to engage with the government to reopen it. And of course, the only missing link in this whole puzzle is the Central Africa region. And that's why we're very pleased that today we would be marking the commencement of operations from this office. Recall that we signed the agreement to set up the regional office in 2019, December.
When we had our first interview, of course.
Yes. The pandemic intervened, so we couldn't start operations immediately, but we've surmounted that hurdle. The office is ready, thanks to the generosity of the government of Cameroon. We've hired staff. On Monday, in 2 days' time, the doors will be open at the CMPS building, and we'll start receiving customers. And when we do that, we would bring the AFREXIMBANK closer to the organizational arrangement that we believe will support the AFCFTA. You
purchased a land in Cameroon to establish your permanent headquarters. How much is it going to cost in construction? How much trade inflow would be within the CEMAC area, and why did you even choose Yaoundé?
No, we didn't purchase the land, as you can imagine. Usually, in our locations, the governments do a land grant to the bank to enable it build its headquarters. That was the case in Egypt, where we have our headquarters, the case in Nigeria, the case in Cote d'Ivoire, the case in Zimbabwe, the case in Kampala, and actually the case in Tunisia. The governments in all those countries provided the land for us to develop our offices. And we are very, very pleased to have been shown a wonderful piece of land by the Minister for Land Tenure, where we hope to develop the permanent office for the Central Africa Regional Office. We, based on the experience on the projects we are developing now for our offices, we expect that we will be investing between $100 and $120 million to develop that office. Now, why? Because we made a decision, and our board approved that, to develop our offices into Africa Trade Centers, called the AATCs, the AFREXIMBANK Africa Trade Centers. The Africa Trade Center is a concept that we developed to create a network of trade centers that will serve as hubs for trade information and linking businesses all across the continent.
Okay.
So each Africa Trade Center will have the office for AFREXIMBANK to stay, offices for others, a trade information hub, an exhibition facility, a hotel facility, a technology incubation hub, and so on. So, and that is what we replicate in all parts of the continent where we will have offices.
You plan to invest about $5 billion in this sector. Before I ask you a question on your role for the Continental Free Trade Area, just establish to me what support will you be giving to the Cameroonian medium and small-sized enterprises with this regional branch here in Yaoundé in particular?
Yes, you know, we always know that. I mean, the SMEs are drivers of any economy. And in the context of the AFCFTA, there's a lot of emphasis being paid on SMEs and women. And the reason for this is that if you look at it today, the entities championing intra-regional trade are SMEs. The entities championing intra-regional trade are women. So they have already the experience trading all across borders on the continent. So it makes sense to build on that. That is why we've created an SME unit in the bank. What we want is to have SMEs to operate in intra-African trade supply chains. We want the SMEs to act as indirect exporters. We want to see how we can create structures that can formalize the trade, informal trade, that the SMEs and women are currently doing. And that is why we've developed the concept of the export trading companies, which will act as aggregators of what the SMEs sell. And that makes it easier for us then to finance the SMEs using products such as factoring, receivable finance, reverse factoring. It makes it easier for us to get trade information down to the SMEs, because the export trading companies is one that will manage information globally or in the data system, the continental web arrangement. But then that information will pass down to make sure the SMEs know what the markets need. We are working very, very hard on this because we know that if we grow the SMEs, we will grow trade. Through the SMEs, we will also bring development.
You are present in 51 African countries today. The African Continental Free Trade Area is one of the key features of the African economies in the 21st century to create the largest trading bloc in the world as a single market, 1.3 billion people, to generate at least $3 trillion into the African economies. What is the critical role of the AFREXIMBANK in this giant once-in-a-century project?
Yeah, the AFCFT and the AFREXIMBANK called it joining the hip. The AFREXIMBANK was actually founded to drive intra-regional trade. And it was founded in the anticipation that one day we would have the AFCFTA. Don't forget the Lagos Plan of Action. Don't forget the Abuja Treaty that was just signed just about 2 years before AFREXIMBANK was created. So the idea was that you couldn't have a continental free trade agreement without a financial institution that will give it the teeth. So what that then meant was that as soon as the agreement was signed in 2018, we began to engage the African Union very, very actively to be able to provide the support that is expected of an institution like ours.
What kind of support in particular, specifically?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. First, the issue of support of the financing is a different thing. In the past 5 years, we already done disbursements of about $20 billion in support of intra-African trade. We plan to double that with the AFCFTA in place to bring it to about $40 billion. And that will come because we are doing a general capital increase, because we see the AFCFTA coming. But beyond that, we have developed the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. This Pan-African Payment and Settlement System will make it possible for Africans to trade among themselves in their national currencies. This system is what will make it possible for SMEs to be much more involved in intra-African trade. This system is expected to save the continent about $5 billion annually in transfer charges, that we spend today. This system will make it possible for a trader, somebody in Cameroon here, who wants to buy something from Egypt, to pay in CFA francs. The Egyptian will receive Egyptian pound. So that will be a game changer as far as we are concerned. And as we speak, the system is piloting in the West African Monetary Zone. And we expect that we will expand it to the rest of the continent in a few weeks. AFREXIMBANK is backing the clearing at the pilot zone with about $500 million. We expect that when we go fully continental, that the settlement and clearing will require about $3 billion to back it. Okay. And AFREXIMBANK will be leading that effort. There is an adjustment facility that is included in the AFCFTA. It is this adjustment facility that will determine which country would welcome the trading under the AFCFTA, okay, and those who may not.
In a moment, we'll talk about your role and COVID-19 on the continent, but let's just stay in Central Africa in particular. This is an area with a liquidity crisis of roughly $42 billion over the years. When the Export-Import Bank of Africa comes to Central Africa, what kind of trade problems will you be solving in particular with liquidity issues?
Well, you see, there are two things. I think there's sufficient liquidity, perhaps, in CFA franc. Okay. I think there may be liquidity challenges with respect to foreign currency, US dollars and all that. And for obvious reasons, countries are beginning to recover. Oil prices just recently started recovering. In this area, oil is very, very important. So the liquidity issues are there, so you have payment delays sometimes in terms of for international trade. So what are we looking at? We think that in the first 5 years here, we will do almost more than $5 billion in business. Okay. And those $5 billion would bring liquidity that will support trade. Liquidity that will support international trade. Liquidity to some extent will support intra-regional trade. Because don't forget that payment system I described will be based more on local currency, but on a net basis, we will clear in foreign currency.
Okay. Go ahead, complete your idea before we move to the error.
We believe that the $5 billion will make it possible for this region to receive the imports they need to create the export capacities in processed goods.
Okay.
We believe that you need this kind of foreign exchange resources to do the infrastructure that is required to make it possible for this region to trade more with itself and with the rest of Africa, and in fact, the world.
Okay.
So that is the difference we'll be making with some of our interventions.
You mentioned earlier the impact of COVID-19 in your operational activities in expanding Yaoundé in particular. You know that COVID-19 has infected close to 200 million people in the world today. At least 5 million others have died. Economies have been disrupted. At least $80 billion lost by the global economy each day. What has been your own role in these critical moments?
No, we've intervened against the COVID very, very aggressively. And that's because we understand how to manage shocks. As early as March, we launched the Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility. I mean March last year, once the pandemic was declared. It didn't take us time to get a board approval to implement a Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility. That facility made it possible for us to attack the two aspects of the crisis. The health issues, to help countries to procure the goods that are required to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. And then, of course, to make sure that the countries, our member countries, are able to adjust in an orderly manner economically to the crisis by making sure they meet trade debt payments that were falling due. As we speak, we disbursed about $7 billion since then. That is maybe the second largest disbursement made against the pandemic to date.
On the continent?
Yes. Then we also did something, worked with the UNECA, Mr. Strive Masiwa, the AU envoy, the Africa CDC, to develop the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. You know, people who have forgotten by now. By around April last year, when the pandemic hit, there was a big scramble for COVID containment materials, personal protective equipment, face masks, test kits, and all those things. We didn't have capacity to manufacture on the continent. We had to look for it. We were able, through the intervention of President Ramaphosa as chairman of the AU, to get the Chinese to allocate certain quantities of this for us to buy. But we didn't want African countries to go and be competing against themselves. And we wanted to have a pooled procurement arrangement that will enable AFREXIMBANK to support the countries. So we developed the Africa Medical Supply Platform, and through that, we've been able to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars of COVID equipment to many countries on a fair and equitable basis, so that the small island economy was paying the same thing as the big economies like Nigeria and South Africa.
Seychelles, for example.
Yes.
The Comoros Islands.
And within that platform, we provided a $100 million overdraft facility. So that countries that were having liquidity problems to pay for those, given the urgency, they were covered. Fast forward, vaccines came.
Yeah. But just going to ask a question about vaccines,
yeah,
which
these
is
are part of
messaged today as the best way to end the pandemic.
Yes, it was. But as you know, even today, access to vaccine has been a very challenging thing. Regrettably, apart from the Aspen facility in South Africa, we don't have anywhere to manufacture vaccines.
Okay.
So Africa needed to get its own vaccines, to buy vaccines. The COVAX facility promised to deliver enough vaccines to vaccinate 20% of the population. This was eventually raised to 30%. But the target of the African Union was for Africa to do 60%.
Worked together by the African Union, the Global Alliance for Vaccine, the European Union, and CDC America and CDC Africa.
No. The COVAX was the one doing or delivering on the other international.
That is a platform, for everybody.
Yeah, but the African Union, the target was 60%. But the COVAX arrangement said, okay, we'll give you 20, then raise to 30%. But then, of course, even with that 30% was threatened, because India, where they were going to bring the vaccines, put an export ban. So what we did was that the African Union created the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, of which AFREXIMBANK was a member.
Okay.
Then that task team was tasked with the job of looking for vaccines for the African Union and looking for the financing. Okay. So we as AFREXIMBANK approved the $2 billion that made it possible for Africa to then, African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, to acquire 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccines. Okay. And those are the vaccines that are being delivered today on the continent. So I think that we've made a huge impact. If I look around and I see countries receiving those vaccines, it tells me, it makes me to ask, if we didn't have an AFREXIMBANK, what would happen to the fate of the continent?
In a few months from now, the African Trade Fair, the Intra-African Trade Fair, will be taking place in Durban, South Africa. How much of an input the AFREXIMBANK is having in this operation, which is expected to raise about 40 billion of transactions for businesses, more than 10,000 exhibitors or visitors expected in this market?
Well, the Inter-African Trade Fair 2021 that we hold in Durban between the 15th of November to 21st of November will be the second in the series. The first was held in 2018 in Cairo. AFREXIMBANK conceptualized the Inter-African Trade Fair, and in partnership with the African Union and the AFCFTA Secretariat are championing it. So we are fully involved. As a matter of fact, we are providing the about $20 million required to organize the whole trade fair. So our team, in terms of financial, non-financial resources, are there, working very, very closely with not only the AU and the AFCFTA Secretariat, but also with other partners, the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Afro Champions, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and even the World Trade Center Miami, and AE Trade Group. A lot of people who are partners in this endeavor, because it is one of the key deliverables of the AU under the AFCFTA. You know, they want to make sure that trade information is critical. We have 55 fragmented economies. Colonialism made it difficult for us to know what is happening across borders. So as we begin to trade under the AFCFTA, we have to find a way of making sure that we reverse engineer this balkanization. We have made it a priority that we go and do the physical trade fair, but we have the virtual trade fair, which we launched shortly after the first trade fair. And today, it is very, very active. What we call the IATF virtual. If you go to the internet and go to IATF virtual, you'll see the trade fair there. Okay. So we expect that this particular trade fair, the IATF 2021, will be even bigger than what we saw in 2018. Africa
is the largest continent in the world, close 30 million kilometers square, 55 countries, like you said, 1.3 billion people. What are the key people impacting projects you have sponsored 22 years on, that we can say without the AFREXIMBANK, this will not be possible?
One of the big projects today, because it's going to be a game changer for the whole continent, we are the biggest financier for the Dangote refinery. We have about $1 billion financing for that Dangote refinery.
He himself was guest here about a month ago.
Yeah, that is a project of about $19 billion valuation today. That refinery is called Dangote refinery, but you have the petrochemical plant, you have the fertilizer plant, you have the refinery. It's the largest single train refinery in the world, 650,000 barrels a day. The fertilizer plant is one of the largest in the world to supply the capacity to supply the whole requirements of West Africa for urea. So that is a huge one. If I come to this region, we are a big financier of the port in Gabon, the mineral port, as well as the Arise Industrial Park.
Okay.
Made a huge impact for that country and for that region.
The president of the Africa Export-Import Bank, Professor Benedict ORAMAH. Thank you very much indeed for being our guest.
Thank you very much, Charles.
You're welcome, sir.
All right.